We've gotten used to Clyde Edgerton's engaging writing and his reputation for great storytelling in best-selling books, and for his teaching, his commentary, and mentoring other writers. He's been at this for a good while. In fact, it sometimes seems like yesterday when Raney, Edgerton's first novel, was published in 1985. We'll talk to him about that groundbreaking book and the rich career that followed, and about some of the projects that keep him busy today. All that on North Carolina Bookwatch, next.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting PBS-NC.
Welcome to North Carolina Bookwatch and to Flyleaf Books in Chapel Hill, one of North Carolina's great supporters of writers and of North Carolina Bookwatch. I'm D.G. Martin, and my guest is Clyde Edgerton, author of Raney, his debut novel, and some of the many others that followed. Clyde, welcome.
D.G., thanks for having me.
I'm excited about looking back in your career and going back to 1985.
Right.
When Raney came out.
85 is the year. I guess I feel really, really fortunate to have been able to find a publisher the way I did, accidentally, in Lewis Rubin. I had the book, a manuscript, and didn't know that he was starting a publishing house in Chapel Hill.
You know, I ask authors all the time about how did you get your first book published, and you've really got a story because you brought along a new publisher. I mean, he wasn't in existence when you started looking for a publisher.
You know, I worked without any creative writing classes and whatnot, and so in 4 years, from 78 to 82, I think I had 12 stories, and I had 202 rejections, 6 acceptances, and of those stories. And finally, I started putting stories together and made Raney. But when it finally was published, let me jump ahead, when it was published, 1985, a little local newspaper, I was living in Apex, they interviewed me about the novel, and it had been rejected probably 11 or 12 times before Algonquin accepted it. But the headlines in the Apex paper was, local author gets novel published after 202 rejections.
Well, you.
So that's not exactly what happened, but I did find out that Lewis Rubin might read a chapter of the book. So I knew he was a baseball fanatic. So I wrote him a note. I said, I'm reading a really good baseball book, and I'll send it to you if you'll read one chapter of my novel. He wrote back and said, send along the chapter. Well, I had 2 chapters that I wanted him to read, and I couldn't decide which one. So I sent him the book and a check for $10 to buy another baseball book and ask him to read 2 chapters. He wrote me back and said, and this is writing, you know, this is letters in the envelope, the mailman comes and all. He wrote back and said, I've torn up the check. He said, I'll get back in touch with you in a few days. Well, I knew that if I'd been writing for a while. If he liked this chapter, my life was made. If he didn't, it was all over. So I waited and waited, and I didn't wait long because he's always quick in reading. He wrote back and he said, I like what I read. I'm sending it to our fiction editor. I'm starting a publishing house. Sending it to the fiction editor, Shannon Ravenel. Well, I knew that name because I'd been reading Best American Short Stories. So they gave me a first option contract, which meant we'll give you the summer to find out if you can revise. And if you can revise, we'll finish off this contract in the fall. So I had the summer working with Shannon Ravenel, and then Lewis read what we ended up with and said, I promise I'm gonna get to the end of this quickly. He said, it looks good, except there are 5 chapters, he named the chapters, which should be 3 chapters, and something funny needs to happen in there. And I immediately knew what to do. There was a chapter with some golden agers, old people, and there was a chapter about a bluegrass festival. And I said, I'll just have these golden agers being taken to the bluegrass festival, and that'll combine my chapters. And I had a story about breaking my thumb that I'd never written up, a biographical thing. So I wrote that up and gave it to Raney's little brother. And they published it, and so that's kind of the story of how it came about. Again, I was so fortunate. I didn't have an agent. Actually, I had an agent, but that's another story. He kind of flaked out on me. I won't go into that, but.
Well, let's go talk a little bit about this book, which we're focusing on as an important part of North Carolina literary history, Raney. Who is Raney, and talk about her and the other main character of the book and how they relate. And then maybe if you do it right, we can get you to sing a song about those characters.
The song you're talking about, the chicken song, was something that I had written. I was doing music before I started writing fiction, and I had written a song, the chicken song. And so once I started writing the novel, I said, maybe I can put the chicken song in the book, and I did. And it's funny because when I look at it now in the book, it probably wouldn't be in there again. But how the story started was I drove up with my wife in front of our house, a little house in Apex, and my aunt's car was in front of the house also. And I thought to myself, oh my, she probably walked in the house, the door was open, and I thought to myself, maybe not, because I thought that might not be popular with my wife. My wife was from Atlanta, and father was a professor, and my people were more country, and so there was I worried about the kind of cultural clash. I said, she might be in the backyard picking up apples. So we went around to the backyard, and my aunt was not back there picking up apples. She stuck her head out the back door, and she said, I'm just leaving a note. Is that okay? And Susan, my wife, at that time said, we love you, but it's not okay if we're not there. And my aunt looked at me from up on top of the steps, and my wife looked at me, and they were both looking at me, and I did the smartest thing I've ever done, one of the smartest things. I just kept my mouth shut. I didn't say anything. But I immediately thought, and I just started writing fiction, I said, oh, there's a story here. But the story can't be told in my subculture, by a man. It's got to be told by a woman. And I immediately saw her. She was 24 years old, and I found her name in the obituaries in the News and Observer, her first name and the last name here, Raney Shepherd. And I just started to talking about what's the problem with her, and I made it her mother coming in the house when she and Charles, her husband, were not there. What's the problem? So I had a nice little story of that, and then that led to another story, which led to another story. Finally, I had 100 pages. I didn't know what to do with it, and I knew one writer in the world. It was my cousin, Sylvia Wilkinson, speaking of North Carolina writers. She lived in California. I sent her the 100 pages. She wrote back and said, you need 200 pages. Just put those ants around the dining room table and let them, that's A-U-N-T-S, aunts for people in the north part of the state. Let those ants just start talking and finish the book that way. So that's what I did, had the novel and sent it two chapters to Lewis.
It worked. Well, who are the characters in your book?
Well, Raney and Charles get married, and the book is about the first 2 years, 2 months, and 2 days of their life together. And he's from Atlanta, as I mentioned before. The rest of the characters are mainly Raney's family. She's got Aunt Naomi, Aunt Flossie.
They're in what I would call a conservative part of North Carolina.
Well, they are. They're from the first 18 years of my life. When I was 18, I came to Chapel Hill to go to school. And there was a gradual movement toward or out of a kind of conventional, rural, conservative, provincial life for me. And so after I was 18 and up until I started writing this book, I came up with ideas I never knew existed about all kinds of things in the world.
In that respect, you're like Raney.
The first 18 years, Raney, and the second 18, Charles. So I began to see that I had internalized a lot of this cultural clash, and that I could make up characters and situations, actually a lot of situations from my own life, and put them together and see what happened.
Well, you're like Raney. Before you were 18, you were like
Well,
Raney.
some of the yeah. I mean, it's really interesting to me now. I mean, I think about the fact that so much we're thinking about the divide, the cultural divide in the United States now. That's a lot of talk about that. At least during the universities where I reside, a lot of the time there's a lot of talk about this divide. I think there might be less of it in certain rural areas. I don't know, but anyway, that is what I was coming out of in a way that I continue to be respectful
Well, let me just jump ahead.
Yeah.
Your Raney, who you talked about, falls in love with Charles, and Charles falls in love with her. Charles is tilts on the liberal side. He's not.
They have a love for country music.
Is that what brings them
folk
together?
Music that brought them together. They knew some of the same songs, and they kind of met at this community college where Charles was a librarian.
Is there a song you could sing to us?
Sure, I can do it. Sure, I can do the song that I wrote before I wrote the book. I'll do a little bit of it, and it's been a long time, and you can help me with the words. But I'll do
give us a little background about how this fits in the book.
So the way it fits in the book is Charles has a friend who he talks to on the phone about the situation he's married into. And so he asked Raney to sing her song with him to his friend on the telephone, as I recall. I think that's the way it came about. And so because I had written this song before I wrote the book and wanted to get the song somewhere published, I decided just to give it to Raney. And it's called Chicken Song, and it goes like this. I just do a couple of chapters. The town council chairman came by late last May. Said, we're sorry, Mr. Oakley, about what we must say. But the airport's expanding, we mean you no harm. The new north-south runway's gonna point toward your farm. My chickens ain't laying and my cow's gone dry, 'cause the airplanes keep flying to the sweet by and by, to the lights of the city, to the Hawaiian shore, while I rock on my front porch and tend to get poor. I talked to a doctor, you should have seen the bill. I talked to a doctor, she gave me a pill. I talked to a lawyer, you should have seen the bill. I talked to a professor, he grinned and winked his eye, and he gave me a little book called Chickens Can Fly. The book was by B.F. Skinner about behavior modification. I read B.F. Skinner taught my chickens to fly, to aim at the intakes as the jet planes flew by. My chickens are gone now, but the answer is found. My kamikaze chickens close the new runway down. My kamikaze chickens close the new runway down.
Now, wonderful, wonderful. People who are watching, Clyde, would want me to say, let's do some more. But let's talk a little bit more about the book, Raney, and as we talked about, it was your debut novel, and it set you on a career. I do want you to tell us a little bit more about the book. What was the challenge that Raney and Charles faced with each other and with their surrounding family?
So it was kind of I thought after finishing Raney that the problems I had in writing the novel would carry over to the next novel, and they would carry over to the next novel. But each novel, the ones I've written, have presented different problems, of course. And in this book, there were problems in the marriage, and I needed something that would actually, from a structural point of view, break them apart so that they could come back together and have a child. That was finally what I saw. But I had to write half the book or get into it and get a draft before I started to seeing that. Now, it so happens that I had an uncle who committed suicide in real life. And in the book, there was a character based on that uncle, although the personality was entirely different, Uncle Nate. There was a serious issue with alcohol with Uncle Nate, as it was with my uncle. In the book, spoiler, Uncle Nate commits suicide. Raney and Charles see that suicide, the sources of it or the reasons for it, or part of the underlying story, very differently. And it causes them to break apart for a while. So I had to continue writing drafts to come to that final kind of form. I do remember in this particular novel that I had neighbors growing up that I had listed across the top of a page, and under the real neighbor's name, I would put my fictional character's name, and then I would I had a list of what they had for breakfast, where they went to church, and that helped me create fictional characters, which were not like the real characters. So I was learning how to take my experience. I thought when I started writing novels that everything was supposed to be made up. I had no idea that you could use your own experience. And so that's one reason it was such a failure to start with. I was making up all this stuff, and suddenly I realized I could, as Faulkner said, you've got three treasure chests. One is your own experience, one is what you see and observe, and one is what you make up. But you've got those three treasure chests. And as soon as I realized I could pull from my life, not unlike Flannery O'Connor said, if you write about what happened to you before you were 12 years old, you can write for the rest of your life. So when I saw the richness that happened to be in my upbringing and in the stories and in the family and the loyalty and the disloyalty, in the religion, in the racism, all of that gave me material. And so I brought that into every story, every family story in Raney was from my family except for one. I can't remember which one, but I pulled on a lot of that. Oh, I got to tell you one quick one. So just before I finished the last draft, one of my aunts was talking to another aunt, and she was telling a story about, I always have to censor myself when I'm in modern age, but I think this is okay. If it's not, it'll be cut out. So my aunt is remembering seeing her cousin at the beach one day when they were jumping up and down and jumping over the waves and just jumping up and down. And somebody all of a sudden said, "Lord, have mercy, one of Lola's dinners has fell out."
Dinners?
One of Lola's dinners has fell out. Well, I heard that story and I'd finished the book pretty much. I said, "Oh gosh, it's got to be in there." So,
well, just to be sure, because I mean, I'm so dense. When I first
never
read
heard
it,
that term
I
before.
didn't know what a dinner was.
Well,
but a
I
dinner
didn't
is a woman's breast.
If you want to get specific about it, I was going to leave it up to the imagination of the reader, but now we're getting way off.
Okay.
Yeah, so that was just an example of how the stories in my family got into that book. But I wanted the tension to be there. What I wanted beneath the story, which is what has to be beneath any fiction which is in any way universal, is hope and fear. And I think you can find other words for hope and fear, but if those concepts are not beneath the story, it's probably not going to have the legs that it might have.
So what do you tell your students? That's tough to, that's easy to say, but hard to get to.
It is, and I think students often think about how we educate young people in classrooms. As someone normally, although there are certainly beautiful exceptions, standing in front of young people telling them what to think, and they get it fed back, and they have to do well, and they're not interested, they know better than to challenge the person who's teaching them. And so there's a lot of, I mean, when I was 12, 15, if somebody told me your life up until now, 12 or 15, has a lot of drama that means a lot in it, I wouldn't have known what they're talking about. And so I think my students, I try to let them know that it's okay to take what has happened to them that as energy and to use it to make up a new story that carries something important about them and their family and therefore their culture and therefore all human beings. I ask them to write down the first 12 years of their life, the year, like for me, 1944 and on up, but say now 2000, 2001, 2012, write that down, and then beside each one, come up with something that happened to you that's memorable. You broke your thumb, your grandmother died, your pet got run over, your parents divorced, etc., and then use that to begin to think about maybe a made-up character and how these events, and so you can bring some of the emotions to the story that otherwise wouldn't happen. Flannery O'Connor says you can be she didn't say it exactly this way, but you can be if you've got a homesick prisoner in New York, you don't have to have been a prisoner. You don't have to have been to New York, but it helps if you've been homesick. And if I can get students to realize the power of the feelings that go with their past experiences, that can sometimes help them become storytellers.
Wow. Well, that is amazing. Now, with respect to Raney and all of these things that you taught us just now that went into the book, when it was over and you're looking back at it, was it a great success?
You know, I'm lucky in that when I go back, I don't go back much, but I'll go back and look at something occasionally, dip into a book. I feel good about this book. I feel good about it. There are some things that I might change, but I feel good about it. And I kind of secretly feel like the people in the book reflect, the two main characters reflect the divisions that we have now in our culture, and probably that are always in all cultures when you have something that's new and something that's old. And one of the complaints about the book from the administration at the university where I was teaching when I wrote it was that it shows the old clashing with the new replacing the old, and that was a criticism. And of course, I didn't quite agree with that, but that was a problem that somebody found with the book. So I feel comfortable with the book and fine with the book. It's not the one that I wouldn't throw out of the boat if I had to throw them all out of the boat except one, and that would be the Float Plane Notebooks, because that was the third book, and I'd learned so much more about my family.
Let me interrupt you just to.
But please do. I'll go on forever. It'll be my show.
But what did you learn that you from Raney and from looking at it and becoming older and wiser, and that you put to work in Walking Across Egypt and Float Plane? What did you learn?
What I learned was to take stories from my own past. But what I learned about Walking Across Egypt came from Jill McCorkle. I was finishing up this book, and I read July the 7th. Now, this book is told in the voice of Raney. This is a first person for people who write novels. It's the first person. The person is talking. I had to become this character, and I was trying to become a person who was not of my gender. And so I wrote the first draft, and I gave it to somebody, and I said, does this seem like a woman writing the story? And they said, not quite. So I came back, and I had to think about it. So a fourth of the way through, halfway through, three-quarters of the way through, and toward the end, I just had Raney go to get her hair done. And the way I kind of worked that in, I think it made a difference. And there are other things I tried to do. But I learned that you could be anybody. But the first person, this is, I think, the only full novel, first person. It was so much fun, and you'd have to really go in to become someone else, and who believes and thinks and acts and looks differently than you do. So that was a good experience, because I felt like I kind of got it. But I'm reading Jill McCorkle, and Jill is writing a book, and again, I hadn't studied literature, but I'm reading a paragraph, and in the next paragraph, she'll be in someone else's head. And I'm saying, that's amazing. It's third person, and it goes into someone else's head. And so I said, I wonder if I can do that. And so luckily, the second book that I started, I tried to use that, what I call a third-person comprehensive. I use that point of view, and that helped me so much get through the second book, which came much quicker and much easier than this one, and I was lucky because of that.
So you give Jill credit for giving you an alternate way to look at it.
Oh, yes. And she was just, she published her 2 books before I did at Algonquin, and to see her and to get to know her, and we're experiencing this publishing house where everything is stuck in the trunk of a car, and we're driving down to Atlanta, and I made a whopping $500 on $250 at a time on my first novel, and Louis Rubin, and I mean, just I could talk forever about Louis and Shannon and how they edited, and they basically said, we can give you editing. In fact, after I wrote this book, I got a letter from a publisher that said, we'd like to publish your second book. And I took it to Louis, and I said, Louis, what should I do? And he said, go with them if you want to make more money. He said, if you want good editing, you might want to think about staying here. So it took me about 10 minutes to decide to stay, and I did. And then he got me an agent, which was not in his interest. So there was so much going on there, and I'm sure that still goes on today, although you kind of wonder about how much that kind of looking for and working with a writer who has potential rather than someone who's already a bestseller. I'm sure it goes on at university presses and other presses, but the word on the street is that happens less in New York.
Well, we've only got a minute more.
I'm sure I've talked
you do just no, you're doing. This is so wonderful. I hate to interrupt you, but you wrote your first book in the voice of a woman. And I mean,
so I can tell you, I can anticipate the question and I can answer it. And we didn't rehearse, right?
You can tell we didn't, yeah.
So my mother was 40 when I was born. She had a slightly older and slightly younger sister who were childless. And my mother had lost a child. So I was the only child among these 3 women who talked more than I do, and who loved language, who loved to tell stories, who loved to laugh, who loved to find odd things in the world. These 3 women took me with them, shopping, eating, blah, blah, blah. And I was absorbing this stuff, not realizing that not all children are that lucky. And only, again, when I learned to write about my own experiences, did I hear those voices. And I had 23 aunts and uncles. And the uncles talked about as much as, compared to the ants, about as much as you have in this conversation, and the ants talked about as much as I have during this conversation. So I was full of these women's voices, and of course they were in my
I just have to
the
say,
language I grew up in, which was
thank
not
goodness
standard.
for those women, for launching you and giving you the voice, a wonderful voice, right within Raney and in your successive books. But our time is really up.
Well, DG, I can't stop without saying that you've allowed so many writers to do what I just did, to talk about what we did. Because, you know, people don't just walk up and ask us these questions.
But thank you so much for that. And thank you, Clyde Edgerton, for being with us on Bookwatch, for your great service to North Carolina. And you've been a great guest on Bookwatch. So thanks to those of you who are watching, thank you, and check the webpage for other information about North Carolina Bookwatch. And I'll look forward to seeing you soon.
Quality public television is made possible through the financial contributions of viewers like you, who invite you to join them in supporting PBS NC.